Good afternoon. Oh, wow, that was great. I love being able to talk to myself and not hear anything. Good afternoon. All right. This is the first day of Tech Ed. I expect you to have all kinds of energy. You know what? I've got 9 presentations over the next course of 4 days. And so by the time we reach the end of Thursday, which would be my last day here, I have to fly to China and do one-day Tech Ed in Beijing on Saturday. I expect to see an intense amount of interest. I want you all to be dancing, not sitting in your chairs. I will arrange to have a disco ball installed, all right, before the time is over, so we can just all have a good time. Now, I have a question I want to ask you. I always like to ask this when I get started at these things. How many of you are at Tech Ed for the first time this year? Let me put your hand up high. Let me see how many of you new. Okay, welcome. Thank you for coming. You're probably wondering who the hell that guy standing on the floor is, all right? Okay, that's right there. This is who he is. I work in the Trustworthy Computing group at Microsoft. We are not a product group. We have nothing to sell to you. We have no like quotas or anything like that. Our job at Microsoft is essentially to set standards for security development, for privacy initiatives in the organization. My job in the group is pretty much to do what I'm doing for you right now, and that is to travel around the planet and try to teach as many people as possible how to get and stay secure. So the time you spend with me over the next few days will not be time spent trying to make you buy something from Microsoft. We will occasionally be talking about Microsoft products, because some of them are pretty damn good. But mostly we're going to be talking about ideas, ways of thinking about security, new things you might not have thought of before. Sometimes we'll be featuring audience members who play solitaire on their PC because they can't think of anything else to do. I don't know. No, we won't do that. A couple other things that are maybe a little bit different, again, for those of you who are new. I can't stand the stage. I don't like stages. That's because it makes it feel like, you know, I'm the one with all the answers, and you are the one with, you know, who don't have anything important to say, and that's not true. I just happen to have the clicker. That's the only difference. Well, and the microphone too, but that's all. I'd like to come down here because it's a lot more convenient for me. It's more comfortable for me. I can find individual people and I can look in the eye and I can make them think, what the hell is he talking to me for, right? And the other thing is, though, I want you to feel comfortable, at least in the time period, well, with all of the speakers, preferably, but in the time that we are going to be together this year. As always, I encourage your participation. I don't do 60 minutes of talk and then leave 15 minutes at the end for all of you to bail, all right? I will fill 75 minutes. That's very easy for me. But if you have a question or a comment about something, while we are going over the material, I want you to interrupt me. That's the best chance, because you've got the context of what I was saying, and we can get the question answered right away. Don't worry about whether or not I understand you. I spend a lot of time traveling all over the world. I understand a variety of spoken English. It's okay. So in front of your peers, yes, that's perfectly all right. And finally, one other thing. If you actually want to debate with me and you want to argue about something that I've said, that is very welcome. I will tell you why you're wrong. We'll all laugh, and then we'll move on. Sound good? All right. Now, this presentation is something that I originally assembled for a lunch presentation at Tech Ed US. So when those of us who are speakers at Tech Ed US, we don't ever get time for lunch even. They make us give lunchtime presentations. And I thought, what an excellent way to invite people who are maybe just beginning their journey as an information security specialist in their organization. And let's talk about important things to know. Yes, sir?
Short question. What year?
What year? This year.
Oh.
This year. So that would have been June. No, not 2002. No, my 2002 presentations are sitting in a folder called Archive, and I never opened that one again, right? No, this is built this year. And I thought this would be great, right? Talk about 10 basic things. And what I was astounded at was the number of people who would classify themselves as experts who came to the presentation. I thought, okay, that's kind of curious. So I want to take, and again, you're guys are going to get used to this, all right? I want to understand how many of you in the room today would consider yourselves, and there's nothing embarrassing about this, please, how many of you would consider yourselves beginners, that you're just starting, you're beginning to have an interest in what it would be like to have a career as an information security professional? Raise your hands if you're new to this. Thank you. We need more smart people who are concerned about protecting data, and I'm glad that you're here. How many of you would consider yourselves well-seasoned professionals, and you've done this all your life for as long as you can possibly remember? All right, that's a few of you. Why in the hell are you here? All right? All right? For a show, you know, a dinner and a show? I don't know. All right? Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, one of the things that I've always thought is kind of interesting is if we take a moment and understand just how different it is for those of us who are tasked with protecting information and those of us, notice he's crossing the aisle, who have decided to attack information. I see, I got it right to the left side and the right side. Hey guys, in Washington, we do vote by mail. Our ballots arrived on October 17th. I filled in my ballot the day it arrived. I took a picture of it, and I sent it to everybody I knew. I cannot wait for this election season to be over. Oh, my God. Anyway, okay, so aisles, yes, right. So what's the difference, left and right, we and they? Maybe let's take a moment and think about different areas of work. We, as the good guys, have to fix all vulnerabilities that are found. Is that not true? But the people who are the bad guys who want to break into something, all they need to do is find one. And you are owned, as the title says. We have to protect all victims, all pieces of software, all machines that are out there. But the bad guys only need to attack one, and you're owned. As good guys, we still are not using as much automation as we could, whether it's something as simple as organizational units to find a group policy and you put a server computer name in there to automatically assign security settings, or you use the security configuration wizard, or something maybe a little bit more sophisticated that gives you inventorying as well, like System Center Configuration and Operations Manager. We need to start automating this stuff. I've talked about this before. A few years ago, the Carnegie Mellon University did some research. They looked at 18 months of successful attacks. Why were these attacks successful? And what they determined was that 95% of them succeeded because of an error in the configuration, a mistake somebody made. Every time you build a server from scratch is an opportunity for you to make a mistake. And that's what the bad guy is going to find. That's how I got my start in information security. I worked at the telco department at an electric utility company in Columbus, Ohio. Electric utility companies have massive data networks. We sold bandwidth back to the phone company, who then billed us for it. That was really weird, but whatever. And there was we got some strange traffic into the network one day, and how did that come in there? And I called up the firewall guys, and I said, I'd like to see the firewall rule set, please. Now, remember, keep in mind, this was 1994. So there were no such thing as like laser printers that were easily available. So he said, okay, I'll bring it to you in about a half an hour. Half an hour? What do you mean? Well, I got to print it. Print it? Can't I just go look at it? Nope, got to print it. Okay. So half an hour later, he brings out this stack. It's about a centimeter thick of paper printed on a dot matrix printer. Now, everybody in the room who's younger than 30 years old is saying, what is dot matrix? Can I meet her? Is she good looking? No, I don't, you know. No, so it was a list of the firewall rules. Rule number 1, allow all traffic. And then rule number 2 through about 9,000 were exceptions, and then exceptions to exceptions, and exceptions to exceptions to exceptions. And then about 2/3 of the way down was that one rule that said if user ID in group vice president, allow all. Yeah, this is one you all have too, right? All right, so no automation anywhere. And guess what? The bad guys, they automate the crap out of everything. It should come as no surprise to you that Microsoft.com is one of the most highly targeted websites for attack. Can't imagine why. And we see an astounding number of WebSphere and Apache attacks against our web servers. Now, boys and girls, I promise you, we're not running those web servers. All right? It's just they've got these huge scripts that have everything in them that they know, and they run it against an IP address range 1.1.1.1 through 255.255.255.254, right? Just to see what might stick. We need to start automating stuff more. Well, that means we got a lot of work to do. We need to plan all this automation because we have to protect all victims and fix all vulnerabilities. But since the bad guys only need to find one vulnerability and attack one victim, and they've already got all their scripts written, they really don't have a lot of work to do. Now, one more poll. How many of you here in the room and where you work, how many of you are responsible full-time? So your full-time job is information security, data protection. How many of you do this full-time? All right? So very few of you, maybe 12 hands total. And how many are in the room here? About 400 perhaps? So for the rest of you, you had some other job, and then somebody came up to you and said, oh, by the way, you got to keep the bad guys out too? All right? All right? And so we have a limited amount of time to do it, but the bad guys, this is kind of their career. So they have infinite amount of time. Now look at this. How many of you still want to be good guys now? I gave a different talk using this slide deck to a student day thing we did in Singapore a couple years ago. So the kids in high school, you call it high school here too, about 17 years old. That would be 12th grade for us. And we spent some time kind of talking about this a little bit more. And there was somebody who's right here in the front row, I think right about where you were sitting. And he had kind of slumped down in his chair, tried to look a little bit invisible, right? It's like, what's the matter? Are you all right? You okay? Yeah. Goes, yeah. You're right. I guess I should stop hacking my neighbors. Hey, I change people's lives. Makes me feel pretty good, I guess. Right? If you were coming to this presentation expecting to get a checklist of 10 things to do, 10 registry modifications, 10 whatevers to twiddle that weren't the default, then guess what? I'm sorry, you're at the wrong talk. So I'll give you 30 seconds to get up and leave now, right? We're not here to talk about this kind of stuff. But I understand that some of you, this is how you get evaluated. How do you demonstrate to your boss that you made the system more secure? How do you prove that? Well, one way of doing that is you open up regedit and you say, look, I made all these changes. It made the system more secure. You don't need to do that anymore. So instead, maybe you could try these. You could prove it to your boss. Nothing's going to happen. And then you can start talking about the real stuff. Now, I want to introduce you to a concept that has not been universally supported by science. Well, this one has, but the next one hasn't. But I think it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. We know what that is. What is that? That is DNA, right? DNA does what? DNA codes for proteins. DNA is a replicator. It is a mechanism for copying information. There has been proposed that there's another replicator in the human body, and that replicator is the thing that moves around ideas. It's called a meme, M-E-M-E, as opposed to G-E-M-E. As I said, the science is not really convinced of this yet or not, but it is an interesting idea, nevertheless, that we humans, with our big brains, maybe serve as the replication mechanism for ideas or memes. Now, I ran across something the other day about big brains that I thought was kind of interesting. This is my 8th year to come to TechEd Europe. And one of the things that I have felt is very important for as long as I've been doing this job is to try to understand how adults learn. You're not like kids. Kids, you know, the head is on a hinge. You open the hinge, you pour in the facts, and they're done, usually. But that's not how adults learn. Adults have to learn through some other mechanism. And one of the ways that we learn is with this attribute that for a while scientists thought only the human brain possessed. And that is the ability to understand your current state, envision what you would like your future state to be, and alter your environment to reach that future state. Now, I'd like to tell you a brief story I read a while back about another animal that did something like this. Crows. Yeah. Surprise, crows. A researcher put a crow in a cage, put some food on the floor. The food was in a kind of cylindrical thing, kind of wide, maybe about 10, 12 centimeters wide, and the walls were about 2 centimeters high. Very easy for the crow to reach in and eat the food. Over a series of days, the diameter of that cylinder was shrunk and the height was increased until it got to the point where the crow couldn't reach the food anymore. So then the researcher put some pieces of wire, stiff copper wire, on the floor of this cage about 15 centimeters long. Crow picked up the piece of wire, tried to put it down in the cylinder, pull the food out. Of course, straight piece of wire is not going to be able to do anything useful. So this crow took the wire, held it in its beak, banged it against the floor until it made a hook. An animal, yes, never seen a hook before, manufactured a hook, reached into the cylinder, pulled the food out. This is an astounding thing. This animal envisioned a future state, altered its current environment in order to get there. That is a characteristic of what scientists would call a big brain. And we have big brains too. Big brains envision future states and try to get there. And what I want to do in this presentation today is talk about memes, the things I want you to replicate. Now here's a meme. Where did that one come from? You ever wonder about that? Somebody had to start that. Who was the first person in the world who thought that this would be an interesting thing to do? But you see it everywhere you go, right? Here's a meme that I hope does not spread. This is I don't want to see that one. All right, now 10 ideas about how to get secure. For those of you who've been with me for a few years, you know that I tend to be a little bit of a stickler for the precision of terminology. And I want to define 5 terms for you. Microsoft sometimes misuses these words, so I need to make sure that you understand what they really are, and if you find that we misuse it in documentation somewhere, do let me know so I can get that fixed. A vulnerability is the thing that is broken. It's the weakness somewhere. This is the door through which an attacker is able to accomplish something evil. There are 3 kinds of vulnerabilities. We typically think of code vulnerabilities, an error in the software, and you fix that with a patch. But far more common are the configuration vulnerabilities, the ones I talked about before, the ones Carnegie Mellon University discovered, the one that I discovered. When I saw that firewall rule list from the electric company, I was able to find there was an error in the firewall rule set that the bad guy discovered by running a tool called Firewalk. Firewalk is pretty old. It's still very effective. You can download it, compile it on your Linux box, and it will map your firewall policy, and it will display them for you. So probably something that you might be interested in taking a look at if you want to see if you've got any holes in your firewall policy someplace. But there is a third kind of vulnerability. I kind of invented this term mainly because I was looking for something that started with a C, but actually it's pretty effective. A circumvention vulnerability is a security policy or control that is so bad, it is so evil, it is so nefarious that it encourages people to look for ways to get around them. Any of you have one? Certainly you do. Possibly you created it. I don't know. Right? But you've seen this all of the time. People will look for ways to get around security that gets in the way of doing their job. And that's called a circumvention vulnerability. The second term, threat. This is the bad guy, or increasingly the bad girl. Okay, that's it. There's a joke I could go somewhere there, but I'm not going to. The point, though, is I hate this distinction between internal and external threats. This is an arbitrary distinction. What do they say? Distinction without a difference? Who cares? If somebody wants to do something bad to your data, whether that's steal it and sell it, or maliciously modify it so that you then make bad business decisions because your data is incorrect, does it matter whether it came from the inside or the outside? Probably not. And I think we spend far too much time worrying about this, and especially when you think about the right way to build a network, which is the talk that I have later, 21st century networking, throw away your medieval gateways. There is no inside and outside anymore. Everything is on the outside. So stop trying to make this distinction in your mind. I don't think it matters. The third is exploit. This is the tool that the bad guy uses to cause your system to fail through the vulnerability. Anybody recognize this exploit? What is it? It says right up there, DCSS descramble. This is the exploit that removes copy protection from DVDs. That's it. 22, 23 lines? What's that? That's it. That's the whole thing. Yeah. I might be breaking the law here. I don't know. I know I was in the United States. Yeah, felt kind of fun. Yeah. The no cops came in the room. That's okay. Now, actually, let's talk about this for a minute. Why was it so easy and so successful? There is a fundamental violation of cryptographic science that happens on DVDs. A DVD is encrypted, and if something is encrypted, that means you need a decryption key, correct? Now, where are you supposed to store decryption keys? Not on the thing you encrypted. But that's what they did with DVDs. It's on the encrypted DVD, so it's easy to find. And that code right there finds it. Exposure. This is what you get to pay after a bad guy exploits a vulnerability and attacks you. So it's time spent cleaning stuff up. It's the money you have to spend in new systems, recovering data, dealing with reputation repair. Now, what's very interesting, after we have these terms fairly crisply defined, is that we can now define one more term, risk. Now, you could go download all kinds of wonderful white papers on risk assessment. These are white papers that are far more effective than any pharmacological agent when you need extra sleep. They're very thick. They have formulas that involve characters that are not in the English language. And instead, I think that something like this is a whole lot easier. I didn't invent this. A gentleman named Richard Tippett came up with this formula. But let's talk about this for a minute. A threat is a 1 or a 0. There is or is not a bad guy. A vulnerability is a probability. So this is a number between 0 and 1. What is the likelihood of something bad happening to us? Yes, the vulnerability may exist, but because of other mitigations in place, say a firewall or traffic inspection of one kind or another, we can estimate that the likelihood is less than 1. Maybe the likelihood is only 30%. So the vulnerability here is 0.3. Exposure is the only element in this formula that has a term, money. So what you get with this is a very simple, internally consistent measure of risk. You cannot use this to compare your risk to somebody else. It won't work, because your risk tolerance, your risk stance, your understanding of your own risk will be different than somebody else. But at least it works for you. And because it uses multiplication, some things easily and quickly disappear. There is a vulnerability, but there is no threat. T equals 0. 0 times anything is 0. Right? So by using this formula, you can rank your risks according to the cost of exposure modified by threat and vulnerability, and you can then begin to very easily start with a risk assessment and mitigation program. Quite simple and quite effective. Yes, my friend. What's that? Peter Tippett. Tippett, wrote a series of articles in publication a few years ago that I read this in, and I think it was the best example of a risk assessment formula that I've seen. Yeah, I should actually put that on the slide. Thank you. All right, point number 2. Let me see your hands again. Those of you who are full-time security professionals, put your hand up high. Let me see you. My friend, do you have any friends where you work? A few? Only the other security guys, right? Who else? Full-time security professional. Yeah. Now, all right. Yeah, you look kind of like a loner. Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. The thing is, we have to learn to accept that because all we do is talk about bad guys, and the bad guys are out there to harm us, that, we're just, I think I did something to the controller. Oh, this is how we're going to be viewed, right? We must accept that there will be people who do not like us, because it sounds like, based on the language we've all been accustomed to using, that all we want to do is impede the business. Well, I want to address this style of thinking throughout the talk, because point number 10 attempts to turn this one around and help you understand how to speak in the language of the people who actually care, so that maybe some people will be your friends now. But it is generally true that the security people, whenever they get invited to sit at the table when it comes time to plan something, are the unwelcome ones, because they're the only ones who get up on, well, there's no empty chair here now, and I was told this is false, who get up in front of the chair and say, no, you can't do that. Well, I don't want you to be thinking like that anymore. This is the most important point. Yeah, I reuse pictures. I don't care. This is the most important point of the presentation right here. You have to start to learn to think like a bad guy. When you are writing an input routine and you expect a certain kind of input and you do your testing. Testing? What's that? When you do your testing, do you test only with expected input? Or do you test with something wildly unexpected that, well, no one would ever think like that? Have I told the story here recently about what I did with an online e-commerce thing and messing up with the quantity of something? How many of you remember me telling this story? Okay, not too many. Good. So let me tell this story again. Surely you've all bought something online at one time or another, right? You know, you go to a website, pick an item, and when you pick an item and you add it to the shopping cart, what do you usually indicate? The quantity, the number of things you want to buy. Now, what kind of numbers do we typically use in this case? Positive integers, 1, 2, 10, maybe, right? Does this represent the entire set of known numbers in the universe? No. I did this. I went to a place and I picked the smallest, shiniest, most expensive item I could find. I added to the shopping cart, and no, I didn't put a -1, guys. Okay, that's boring. I typed a fraction, 0.5, just to see what might happen. Well, there were two separate subroutines that calculated my input, or that handled my input, apparently written by two separate people, possibly on two separate planets. Now that we have an interplanetary routing protocol, this is entirely possible. And you can go down, the RFC got published for it a while back. Interplanetary routing protocol. High latency is its biggest characteristic. Oh, actually, okay, a story within a story. Here you go. You guys all know what RFCs are, requests for comments. These are the documents that describe internet protocols. They usually have a date. Any RFC dated April 1st is a joke, April Fool's Day. And if you've been around networking for a while, you know about the RFC that describes IP over avian carrier. You've heard of this one? TCP IP over carrier pigeon? Okay. A few years ago, some people at, I think it might have been Carnegie Mellon again, I'm not remembering now, actually implemented this protocol. Yes, they printed out IP datagrams, strapped them around the leg of a carrier pigeon, and sent it on its way. It was marginally effective. IP over avian carrier has two distinguishing characteristics. Again, very high latency and approximately 50% packet loss. Anyway, back to this. So I typed a fraction. One subroutine calculated total price. And when it saw a fraction and tried to put it into an integer variable, it rounded. And when you round 0.5, the answer is? 0. Round 0.5. You round up at the 0.5, round up. Sorry. See? Come to my conferences and always learn something new. Yes, that's right. So round 0.5, you get 1. But there is a separate subroutine that calculated total price. And when this thing saw an integer or a fraction and tried to multiply it by the unit price in the database, it couldn't do that. And so it took 0.5 and truncated it. And when you truncate 0.5, you get 0 times anything is? OK. So yeah, displayed on the screen was one item with this price of $0. Like, damn, that was easy. But I'm not done yet. OK, we've got to choose a shipping. Shipping is a percentage of total price. So yes, send me the warp speed, ship it here yesterday option. 40% of 0 is 0. Now, if you've ever been involved in developing an e-commerce system, you will know that you don't develop your own shopping cart. You're going to go pick one from someplace, 300 euros, and you're just done. Now, these things all come configured with test data. What are you supposed to do with test data before you put a system in production? Remove it. Yes. You don't need to be here, my friend. You can take off. No, please stay. It's a good show. But nobody ever does. And in most of these shopping cart utilities, the test credit card number is a Visa. It is a 4 followed by 15 zeros, which is what I entered. Make up an expiration date. It doesn't matter. Hit the submit button. Instant approval. Well, I'm not really a bad guy. I just play one on TV. So I called him up and I said, hey, you know, you need to take a look at order number or whatever. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. But you have a parameter validation problem. You have an input validation problem. You need to check and make sure that you aren't taking malicious data and feeding it to the database. So I had a little bit of a chat with some of their designers, and they said they'd fix the problem. And indeed, they fixed it. I checked it 3 weeks later, and I entered a fraction this time add to the cart, and a little dialog box popped up. It says, "Go away, Steve Riley. You're not supposed to buy from us anymore." No, what they did was browser-side error checking. There was a script that was part of the HTML that checked to make sure that what I entered was an integer and not a fraction. Could I have changed that HTML after it left the browser? Bet your ass I could have. Where are you supposed to do input validation checking, my friends? At the server. So, think like a bad guy. Learn to envision ways that your software could be abused, and then build in resiliency before you let it out. It's the same with network designs. Think like bad guys. Don't put that intrusion detection system there and think that, yep, all right, this is going to help me catch anything that's bad, because if it's on port 80, it's good. If it's on anything else, it's bad. Wrong. Port 80 is the universal firewall bypass protocol. All the bad guys use it too. Now, I want to take a moment here and go over a few points that I would consider to be fundamentals of information security science. Identity is not authentication. And I've talked about this before. Identity is a claim of who you are. Authentication is proof of that. Authentication means that you, the security principal, know a secret of some kind that the system can validate without having to know the secret itself. There is no way you can combine these things and effectively authenticate a human being. You just can't. And the one that kind of disturbs me a little bit is biometrics. Now, we're looking at doing some interesting things with biometrics in Windows 7. And I got some of the guys in Windows 7 who are trying to change my thinking about this. And I chatted with them a while back, and I saw some of the architecture that they're doing. And it looks like they're doing a pretty good job of keeping the identity and the authentication sequence distinct. So I might be changing the way I talk about this, adding a little bit more nuance. It depends on what ultimately happens there. But in general, I don't like the idea of a fingerprint replacing a password, because it isn't a secret. You've only got 10 of them. If you use your toes, you got 20. We guys have one more, but that's it. Right? You need to be sure that you understand there is a distinction here. Encryption is not integrity. If I encrypt something, it doesn't mean that it can't get damaged in transit. If you need to make sure that it doesn't get damaged, or that the recipient can tell whether it got damaged, then you need an integrity protection on top of the encryption, digital signature. Right? In many cases, I see people think that if they encrypt something, then we also have a guarantee of integrity, and it just doesn't work that way. Inspection is not the same thing as intent. And my favorite example for stuff like this is at airports. If I can somehow find out who you are and look at what's in your bag, that's enough for me to know whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. And it's not. It's bogus. When you buy a ticket, this is the US at least, when you buy a ticket, the airline does the matching against the no-fly list. If you're on the no-fly list, you don't know that, but the airline will. So when you go to check in, you present your ID, and the check-in person sees whether you're on the no-fly list or not. If you are on the no-fly list, you get sent over to that little room over there, where the only question they ask you is, what color would you like those rubber gloves? If you're not on the no-fly list, you get your boarding pass. Your boarding pass has your name. And then when you go to stand and beginning to get to the line, the security line, we have the TSA document checker. If you guys all traveled to the United States recently, if you notice that the TSA now has blue shirts instead of white shirts, and they now have a metal badge instead of a yellow patch, they're not cops. and they have no arrest authority. But I think it's interesting they try to make them look like police officers. So that guy there, the document checker, looks at your boarding pass, and he looks at your ID. He's not looking to see if you bought a ticket. And then you get through security, and you go to the gate, and you give them the boarding pass, and that checks to see if you're at the right flight number and if you bought a ticket. There's a hole there. You can print boarding passes for anybody you want. So you can print fake boarding passes. And so here's what you do. Steal somebody's identity, buy a ticket with Alice's credit card. Now, you don't have Alice's ID, unfortunately. You just have a credit card. But you know that you can go over to Bob and you can buy a copy of Bob's passport. So you print a fake boarding pass with Bob's name and Bob's ID. Now you got the boarding pass. You don't actually have to go check in. This is assuming that you're using carry-on luggage only, all right? You don't have to check in. You've already checked in online. And you've got this fake boarding pass that matches your ID. You go to the TSA document checker. You get through that layer of security there. Once you get through security, you go throw away that fake boarding pass, and you use the Alice boarding pass that you actually printed out when you checked in, and that's what matches the ticket when you get on the airplane. Right? So this is a known problem. The November issue of the Atlantic Monthly magazine is an article by a guy who did this at an airport 3 times. And how do we know what he might have been doing with that? His intention was to show how stupid the TSA is. And he succeeded, actually. But we have to understand this here. Now, how does this get back to computer security? I have just about had it with signature scanning as a mechanism for looking for malware. Because the stuff mutates itself so much, it modifies itself, it looks like legitimate traffic. We have to start doing a better job of measuring the intent of what's going on in our networks. Behavior detection, when it gets smart, will beat signature detection every single time. And behavior detection happens mostly in here, the well-tuned human brain, augmented by software that can help understand what's normal and what's not normal. And this is one of the things that I think is kind of cool about the Sterling series of the Forefront products, is it's starting to build in some of this understanding of what's normal, something that I've been wanting to see come for a long, long time. Secrecy is not the same thing as trust. Just because something claims to be a secret doesn't necessarily mean that you can trust it. And things that are trustworthy don't necessarily have to be a secret. And, you know, wireless SSIDs kind of fall into this category here. Broadcast those things. It doesn't matter because they're always in the clear anyway on an association frame. Hiding the administrator account by changing the name and then putting a stupid password on it like Gulf, you know, that's not going to work. Use a passphrase, leave it called administrator. Don't start to build trustworthiness into things that were never intended to be secrets, because people will always find a way to discover what your secret is. People are not the same thing as technology. Understand something, boys and girls. You know, for the past several years, I talk about what? I talk about security. I study security. I help customers get and stay secure. You've come to presentations to learn about security, but the fact is, attacks are rare. It's far more likely that the things that you will be dealing with are mistakes that somebody made. So when you are engineering security policies and when you're enforcing those policies with technical controls, realize that in most cases, what you're going to be catching are nothing more than mistakes that someone might have made, rather than an actual attack. And so when things happen, don't sound accusatory. And one of my favorite examples is this one. I hope that you have a group policy set up to automatically lock workstations after X number of minutes of inactivity. I hope you've got one of these set up. And I hope that you're also shutting the monitor off, too, to save power. But on your noontime rounds, yes, you eat lunch early. And then when everybody else is at lunch, I want you to put a yellow sticky pad in your back pocket. And I want you to walk around your office. And I want you to look for unlocked workstations. And when you see one, I want you to change the password. No, I'm kidding. Actually, you can't because you have to know the old password to do that, right? I want you to reach into your back pocket and take out your little yellow sticky. And I want you to write, "The security department needs your help. Please lock your workstation when you leave." And stick that on the monitor, right over the one that has the password reminder on it, right? Don't threaten. Don't put your name on there. Don't say we're going to write you up. Just ask for their help. And do it again tomorrow. Probably the same person you did yesterday. You're going to leave another yellow sticky. But you know what? Eventually, you're going to get the behavior you want. When Alice gets up to go to lunch with her friends, she'll say, "Oh, wait a minute. I don't want another one of those yellow stickies from the security department. I better remember to lock my workstation." Right? Very, very simple. Nobody gets in trouble. You haven't embarrassed anybody, and you've got the behavior you want. When I hear this phrase, defense in depth, I do a mental substitution, and in my mind, I hear the person saying, "I am a parrot. All I ever know how to say is this." Boys and girls, you know I've been talking for a few years about how to build networks without all these crazy layers, because layers and networks don't do anything. The bad guys attack using application traffic. And so later on, we're going to talk about how to completely get rid of this thing. I've promised it to you in the past. I'm going to give you the actual technical architecture this year, step by step, on how you can build this thing yourself using the technology that you already have. So then that brings the next one up. Stupidity is not the same thing as malice. Again, this kind of gets back to the example of most people are making mistakes. They're not actively trying to be stupid. Here's an operator when I don't know how to put the operator on. This is a balance you have to strike. And you do this in conjunction with talking to the people in the business units. Remember, what is the most risk-free computer? It's powered off. It has no operating system installed. It is encased in 1 meter of solid concrete, and it is sunk to the bottom of the ocean. This is a completely secure computer. It is also a completely risk-free computer. Yes, we can be completely secure, and we can make no money. Or we can make some money, but we have to take a little bit of risk as a result of that. And so the most important aspect of our jobs as people who are charged with protecting information is to make sure that the business units who exist because of the flow of information can do it in a way that they understand and accept the risks. And that's going to be different for every one of you in this room, because it depends on the organization's risk stance. It depends on the kinds of information you are trying to protect. It depends on your understanding of the people who want to attack you. And let me give you another little interesting point here. When you're thinking about how much security should we use, I see a lot of people ask a question that really bothers me. And the question they ask themselves is, well, how valuable will this information be to a bad guy? We don't think that information is going to be very valuable to a bad guy. So we're not going to worry about it all that much. That's the wrong question to ask. The question you ask is, how valuable is the information to us? That's the question to ask. Because you might not think the information is very valuable to a bad guy, but what if the information got stolen? And okay, so let's understand, we don't really talk about stealing, right? Because it's not like he takes it from you and you can't use it anymore. Theft is denial of benefit. So what if the information were copied? What if the information were maliciously modified? You might not think it's very valuable to a bad guy, but what if one of these attacks puts you out of business? This is the way you have to think about it. And then one final point on this one here is, well, yeah, we're not interested in total world domination. Not at all. Only where there's land. Now, I spend a lot of time on the news groups. It's just kind of a nice way sometimes to pass, Monday evening sitting at home, don't really have anything much to do. Seattle's kind of dull on weeknights. And so I like to go through the news groups and answer questions that are not stupid. And believe me, there are a lot of idiots and morons who hang out in these news groups. And I've kind of come to the conclusion that there's not a whole lot of difference between servers and clients. You have to patch them. You don't have any choice. I mean, you got to do this. You should be using the firewall. If you're not running the firewall on your XP or your Vista clients, then what am I going to have to do? Am I going to have get a specially shaped hammer just for your head? Come on, guys. Use this thing. Don't run as admin. And you all know this. And try to reduce the number of people who are admins on your servers. And this is one of these questions that constantly comes across the news groups. And I'm amazed, because this is obviously someone who's never seen a computer in his life. He has now been given enterprise admin access to his organization. And he wants to know how he can prevent other admins from essentially doing their job. Although that's never how the question is written, right? How do I keep an admin from reading file, blah, 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 replace them? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Well, okay, this is not a technological problem, guys. Now, and here's one for you. So let's talk about the client side first. Install anti-malware. Yes, on your computers that you are responsible for in your office, absolutely. Do you personally need it? I don't. I haven't run antivirus on my machines for years. And mainly because I'm never duped by the emails that promise me dancing pigs if I click the attachment. Right? And yeah, I plug my computer into the very dangerous networks, the hotel LAN at a computer security conference or something like that, right? I'm confident enough in the firewall and my own ability to run the computer and keep it patched. And so far, that's worked well for me, right? But most people are not security savvy. It isn't their job. Most people can drive a car. That doesn't mean they have to have an understanding of how a four-cycle internal combustion engine works. How many of you in the room actually know this? Not many, right? So yeah, I think you need anti-malware on the client PCs. On servers, this is where I'm going to be a little bit contrarian and probably unlike what you might hear other people say. Allow me to explain myself. Malware belongs on servers where people store files. File servers, SharePoint servers, email servers. And malware protection belongs on servers where people can exchange files, instant messaging servers. I don't believe that anti-malware is necessary on a web server. People don't put files on web servers normally. Right? It's not normally a web server's job. So how does a web server get attacked? Web servers get attacked because somebody defaces the home page. Okay, that's a permissions problem. Has nothing to do with malware. Web servers get attacked because there's some worm exploiting a vulnerability. Okay, that's because you didn't patch your server, not because you didn't have a virus scanner on there. The virus scanner's ability to detect the worm will always be behind the issuance of the patch. And here's another thing to think about. It's this idea of attack surface. What is attack surface? It's the amount of exposure, basically, that a machine has to incoming bits. The amount of stuff that those bits could touch. That's a bit of an elementary way of thinking about it, but I think it works here. Now, let's take a Windows Server 2008 running a web server role. All right, there's a defined amount of exposure to something like that. Now, let's add an antivirus scan to that server. You've just increased that server's attack surface. It is very likely, okay, maybe that's too strong. It is somewhat likely that there's a vulnerability in the virus scanner. And that vulnerability could possibly be exploited. And I'm not making this up. This has happened. Who said yeah? Okay, you don't have to tell me whether it was the red guys or the blue guys, but what happened in your case?
Symantec.
I didn't say you had to tell me what. But now that we all know.
And it actually told all the clients to distribute the virus. So the clients were helping to distribute the virus through the university.
So the gentleman had an anti-malware program that was instructed by the malware to use the anti-malware as its distribution mechanism. Your computer had HIV. I mean, which is exactly how that virus works, right? I mean, it's exactly what it does. It takes over a cell and makes it become something else. It turns it into a factory. Wow, that's astounding. So see here, we got a real live example of something like this happening. Now, let's think about the idea of managing risk. Here is a file server. This file server also has a known attack surface. But a large part of that attack surface is because it stores files. Understand my point, right? So if the file server's attack surface is this big, and we add the virus scanner, and keep the damn thing patched too, right? Then we're probably reducing the attack surface of the file server because in most cases, the malware scanner will detect the piece of malware that the user drops onto the share. All right? So we're reducing it in the aggregate there. But a web server has a much smaller attack surface. And if you put a malware scanner on a web server, you're increasing its attack surface for no conceivable benefit. Because the best way to keep the web server's attack surface minimized is by keeping it patched. What do I do with zero-day attacks? Show me a malware scanner that catches a zero-day attack the same day. Maybe I'll change my opinion. What's that? Terminal server? Well, I mean, there's lots of different kind of architecture things we could bring into play here, right? But so you make all of your users use terminal server to talk to your web server?
No. I'm just talking about terminal servers.
Oh, you
malware, anti-malware protection on the terminal.
Do I put?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So here's a terminal server running over the internet. Do I put malware protection on the terminal server? Are you letting people drop files on it?
No, but the problem is they use Internet Explorer and then there's spyware.
They use there's Internet Explorer on the terminal server, and then they go out and they get spyware. Yeah. Are they logging on as admin?
No.
Then is this really a problem? Yeah. So terminal server is a client. I understand. They're not logging on as admin. And let me give you one more thing that I think would be more effective than anti-malware in this case. I'm going to talk about this in the privacy talk, but I'll mention to you now. Do you know what the hosts file is? Yep. Okay. There you can download in the privacy talk. I'll have a link to it. But there's a website, MVPS, I think it is, that they keep up to date a hosts file that replaces your existing one. It's about 670K. They update it like every day or every week or something like this, and it has DNS names of known adware and spyware distributors, and it translates all those to 127.0.0.1.
Basically a blacklist.
Yeah, it's your own blacklist. I use it on my own PC. Maybe you could put it on your ISA server. All right, and I enjoy ad-free surfing. I love that, and maybe Maybe that's effective. But if you don't want to do that, then perhaps, yeah, on the terminal server, because it's being used as a client, it would fall under the client side. That would be another thing. Yeah. And don't tweak. Talked about this before, right? Please don't tweak. For the current versions of the operating systems, I think the default settings are more than sufficient for protecting stuff. And then finally, I'm not a big fan of, unless you work for a law enforcement agency and forensics is something you need to do in the course of investigating a crime, probably you don't have the time to really sit and analyze a machine and figure out why it got infected, right? You need to get back in business as fast as possible, so just rebuild that thing and go on. And as I said, start automating this stuff. Right? If you are still hauling out the Windows DVD when you have to build a machine, then, boy, I hope those bearskins are keeping your cave warm. Just, I don't know. I've started taking a lot of closer look at some of this stuff lately, and I really love what we've been doing with System Center now that it's finally enterprise level. And here's a whole list of stuff you can use. In some cases, you might even find steady state is useful. How many of you got PCs with kids? How many of you got kids who use PCs? Slightly different way of saying it, right? More than one person uses PCs? Yeah? If you take a look at steady state, that's great. My kid is 11 years old, and at 11 is when we moved from what's called elementary school to middle school. So this is 6th grade. And we promised our children that at 6th grade, middle school, you get a phone and a laptop. So we went to the T-Mobile store, picked out a phone. I did the laptop selection. I don't know, I just tend to be, I know this stuff pretty well. I tend to like HP laptops, and so that's what I got for home. And so then now I've got this dilemma, right? When I got my first PC, there was no such thing as admins and standard uses, anything like that, right? You just use the PC. And I learned mostly by breaking stuff and fixing it. The way engineers learn about things, right? So now I've got this dilemma. What am I going to do? I got this 11-year-old kid. He's got a computer. He's a pretty smart guy. He just ran for and won student senate at school. I got a politician in my family now. So do I join his computer to the home domain? Make him a standard user, put all this stuff on there that I tell you guys every year to do, and take away the learning opportunity? Or do I leave it alone and let him be admin on the box and learn the way I did? I chose the latter. Now what we did is, well, I love HP's gear, but I can't stand all the stuff that these manufacturers put on the machines when you buy them. So we powered the thing up with a Windows Vista DVD and rebuilt from scratch. I didn't even look at what was on it, right? Just turned the thing on. And I made him sit there with me and fly the machine to do the build. So he installed Vista, patched it, Acrobat, Flash, all the QuickTime, all the stuff you put on the machine to make it useful on the internet, right? 4 hours. I did that for a reason. I wanted him to see the pain involved in building a PC. And I said, Dylan, if you fuck this machine up after this, you're going to have to do it all over again by yourself. And then I thought, maybe I should have used steady state so it would have been easier. But then, I don't know, I didn't. But this is an interesting thing. You might think about this if you've got PCs at home shared by multiple people. Now, I'm not going to say this is true for all of you, but I believe it's relatively true for a subset of people who tend to specialize in information security, that we're proud of our knowledge. If you think for a minute, the success of the organization you work for lies partially in your ability to do your job. Is that not true? And that could be a bit of, I mean, that's like a drug, right? My company relies on me. I'm important. I know everything. And I run into these people a lot, well, not a lot, but sometimes, because I meet with a lot of customers individually, and I can't tell you how many times I've sat across the table from people who say, oh, I know everything, I've got all the answers, I don't need to listen to you morons from Microsoft, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, the fact is, nobody knows everything. And you've got to constantly keep yourself up to date. Now, I know that I'm talking to a rather self-selecting audience, and you guys wouldn't pay 3,000 euros. Is that what it is now? How much does it come to protect it here? 2,200? Yeah, you guys wouldn't pay, well, you didn't pay for yourself. You wouldn't ask your employers for that kind of money if you didn't already like our stuff, okay? I understand that. And yes, we have a lot of interesting places where you can keep yourself up to date. This is actually an interesting one, not very well known. Microsoft.com/protect. So if you are interested in why that machine you had got hacked after you rebuilt it, maybe you could learn a little bit more about some of the latest viruses and worms and things that we see here. We release a report every 6 months assessing the threats that we see around the world, and they are regionalized. So we'll have one for Brazil that's slightly different than we might have one for, I don't know, the United Kingdom, because you're going to see different kinds of threats there. So check this out. It's very useful. The report has got a lot of tables and graphs in there, but I think it's some pretty important research. But it isn't the only place where I go to learn information. How many of you are familiar with the SANS Institute? Right? Anybody got a SANS certification here? Hey, got a couple? Right? So one of the things you have to do to get the SANS certification is you go to all their classes, either in person or online. You take a test, and you got to write a paper. These papers are peer-reviewed before they're published. And I think that it's like scientific publishing, right? They're peer-reviewed. That means other people have already looked at them and have determined that, yes, this piece of information adds value to the body of knowledge of the science of information security. So they'll publish it in what's called the SANS Reading Room. I love this. This is a fantastic resource to get information by your peers, people like you, who've had something interesting to say, they wrote it, and somebody else agreed, and it got published. One other thing that, whoops, too far. This is just a good daily source, Security Focus. I just stick that in my RSS reader. If there's anything that's interesting when I do my morning RSS scans, I'll take a look at that. It's mainly news. And then this last one here, Bruce Schneier and Marcus Random, more than anybody else, have been instrumental in helping me sort of form my own thinking about how I approach protecting information. I might not agree with particular things that they say. Bruce Schneier tends to make a lot of money by criticizing Microsoft because it's funny to do that, but actually he's even tempered that down a little bit. Nevertheless, I think that many of the things that these guys say, I like the way they think. And every once in a while, they write a face-off, against each other, articles for Information Security Magazine. So I tend to follow their writings pretty closely. Again, mainly because I like the way they think about things. And sometimes they think differently than what a standard security person might have to say about something. Now, a while back, Microsoft published this thing called the 10 Laws of Information Security. I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about these briefly. Law number 1, if a bad guy can persuade you to run his program on your computer, it isn't your computer anymore. Pretty obvious. We all understand what that means. If a bad guy can alter the operating system on your computer, it's not your computer anymore. Now we have a piece of technology that can help protect us a little bit, BitLocker. That was the original intention of BitLocker. It didn't occur to us when we first developed this that it would also be useful for you to protect your data. Imagine that. That's why we had to take the team and turn it from 2 people into about 30 people and turn it into a product with a user interface. But yeah, we can help mitigate those kinds of attacks with that. Law number 3, if a bad guy has unrestricted physical access to your computer, it's not your computer anymore. Again, seems very obvious when you think about that, right? Encrypting hard drives is also a good mitigation against this attack. Have I told the stolen computer story? Using a car, smashing into a building, stealing a computer? Anybody remember this one? Okay. So I got a call from a consultant buddy. He had a problem, and he wanted to tell me about it and get some advice. Turns out this customer, they moved their data center from the basement to the first floor, the ground floor of their building. And this is a really new building, and built by some fancy schmancy architect. And the first floor was plate glass windows on all 4 sides of the office building, all the way around. And that's where they put their data center. Yeah. It's very impressive. You could walk down the street or on the sidewalk, and you could look in there, and you could see all these machines, and they're blinking lights, and modems with nicely labeled telephone numbers, and all kinds of problems, right? So one day, a couple of thugs decided they were going to steal some computers. They got a big car. They smashed the glass, ran inside, stole the first server they could find, threw it into the car, and zoomed away. Turns out the server they stole was the domain controller. How do you fix this problem? Plug another machine in and let it replicate? Well, that's the only one we had. Start rebuilding your forest. 30,000 objects. Begin now. Right? I get a call an hour later. They described the vehicle to the police. The police tracked it down, put the thugs in jail, returned the server to my customer, who plugged it into the network and said, "Is this okay?" Now, we all understand what is the likelihood that in that hour, those bad guys might have altered the domain, the DIT on the machine. The likelihood is probably 0, but it is not exactly 0, right? Law number 4, if you allow a bad guy to upload programs to your website, it's not your website anymore. Patch the thing. Law number 5, weak passwords trump strong security. We'll talk more about passwords later. A computer is only secure as the administrator is trustworthy. This gets back to that newsgroup question that I get a lot, right? Well, what? In a computer, an administrator is God, essentially. If you don't trust your God, find a new one. Law number 7, encrypted data is only as secure as the decryption key. Remember the DVD issue. Law number 8, this is the one I would really modify. I would rewrite this. And I would say that no virus scanner is better than an updated virus scanner. Principally because if you have no virus scanner, you know you have no virus scanner, and therefore you will behave in a way that's a little bit safer, right? If you have a virus scanner that's never been updated since you bought the PC 3 years ago, then you're going to behave in a way that you think is, you're going to behave unsafely on purpose, right? No helmet and no seatbelt because, well, the car will protect me. Law number 9, absolute anonymity isn't practical in real life or on the web. We're going to talk more about this in the privacy talk a little bit later. And law number 10, technology cannot solve everything. And we'll talk more about that in the same talk again. Now, wrapping up. The more time I spend thinking about information security, the more time I think that the notion of figuring out how to classify is important. And this kind of gets back to the idea of what the function of our brains are. The human brain is a pattern matching mechanism. The human brain likes to sort things into buckets, into classifications. And so I wanted to just give you a few examples of areas where you can do things like this. Access classifications, who needs access to what? And that then brings in the law of the principle of least privilege. We will talk briefly in the talk on privacy later on this week. I'm going to actually assume that you all know what EFS and BitLocker and RMS are. I'm not going to be describing these technologies to you, but I'm going to be giving you an example of using RMS with another tool that can help you automatically classify information based on required levels of access and these 3 dimensions of data classification. Give you a little bit of way to automate this stuff now so that users can think in the language of business, not in the language of the technology. Here's another example of where things you can be classifying things as well. Now, most of you have been in the industry for a while. Okay, I'm probably going to end up being about 2 minutes late. I hope that'll be okay. Most of you have been in the industry for a while. Most of you have sat in meetings with vendors who will bring in a little yellow box, and they say, if you just plug this thing, I only chose yellow because it was a random color. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. That if you plug this thing into the network, it will solve all of your problems. I want you to do me a favor. Whenever you hear people use words like invincible, like unbreakable, I want you to give that person as much time as you possibly can. I want you to waste as much of their time as you possibly can. And then I want you to remember that most of these people are speaking from this kind of thinking, right? That they know they can fool you. And if they use just the right amount of terms and they use just the right amount of scare tactics and they criticize Microsoft just enough, that you will buy their stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, most of the stuff that people are trying to sell you is unnecessary. The best way to secure your information is by knowing your information, knowing the users of your information, and then changing the way you think about your job. Your job is not to stand on chairs and tell people, no! That is not your job. You first have to buy yourself one of these, and then you have to realize that our jobs are about protecting information, not about restricting behavior. Okay? That's what we need to be doing in the 21st century. Boys and girls, I'm going to be here through Thursday, and we got a lot of stuff to talk about. I hope to keep seeing you over and over again. My time this week is your time. I will be hanging out in the exhibition area when I'm not speaking. Take advantage of it. Please talk to me. I look forward to renewing friendships and making new ones. Have a great day. See you later.